I'm going to start off in Luke chapter 5, if you want to turn to it. Not necessarily the obvious passages for the things that I've just told you that I want to bring, but it's what God spoke to me through these passages, so that's what we're going with. So I've often told the story of when, at the age of 16, I went on holiday to the party island of Ibiza with my mum and dad and my younger brother. So anyone here who was hoping for some sort of rebellious teenage Anna story, you're not going to get it. I wasn't actually a rebellious teenager. But we went to Ibiza and we went to this area called Portinax, and it's just this beautiful, beautiful bay. Don't know if anyone's been there. And it's surrounded by cliffs. And my brother and I went down to the bay one morning and we saw these people jumping off the cliffs into the sea below. And we thought, that looks like a good idea. So up we went, and when we got there, I thought, yeah, no, this isn't a very good idea at all. And my brother was like, you go first, you go first. And after calling him a wimp and about 10 minutes of umming and ahhing, he jumped in. And it's my turn. I edge myself to the edge of the cliff. I look down and I think, yeah, no, I really don't want to do this. Despite the fact that we'd seen lots of people safely jump in, my brother was there, he was fine, and he's shouting up at me, jump, jump. The problem with this is other people swimming could hear my brother shouting jump, jump, and thought it would be a good idea to join in. So, and then that caused more people to join in and more people to join in. And eventually there's this crowd of holiday makers shouting at me to jump into the sea. Not only that, there's this boat trip about to take place, and gradually more and more people are joining this boat trip. And the man who was due to take them shouts up at me, I'm not taking these people on their trip until you jump in. And then I've got people at the top of the cliff telling me to jump in as well. So eventually, after about half an hour, the embarrassment of walking away from the situation and letting all of these people down overcame the feeling of, I really don't want to do this. I don't think it's safe. I am not convinced. And I jumped. And I got a massive round of applause. I felt absolutely amazing. Thank you very much. And I lived to tell the tale. The point is, there was nothing in me that really felt like jumping. I was absolutely terrified. And at the word of all of the people telling me that it was safe, telling me that it was okay, I just chose to jump in. And I think there's something sometimes of that when it comes to being obedient to God. Sometimes we don't feel like it. It feels sometimes against our better judgment for whatever reason. It might be that we've had God's told us to do something specific, like when we looked at Saul and Ananias and Saul, and he had all sorts of reasons why it wasn't a good idea what God had told him. Or it might be just general, everyday obedience, walking with God, just not feeling like it that morning because we're having a bad day or a tough time, and it's hard to step out into it. And sometimes there is an element of choice. And I think we see some of that in this passage. So let's read it. So it's Luke 5, verses 1 to 11. It says this. On one occasion, while the crowd was pressing in on him to hear the word of God, he was standing by the lake of Gennesaret, and he saw two boats by the lake. But the fishermen had gone out of them and were washing their nets. Getting into one of the boats, which was Simon's, he asked him to put out a little from the land, and he sat down and taught the people from the boat. And when he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, "Put out into the deep and let down your nets for a catch. And Simon answered, Master, we toiled all night and took nothing. But at your word, I will let down the nets. And when they had done this, they enclosed a large number of fish, and their nets were breaking. They signaled to their partners in the other boat to come and help them. And they came and filled both the boats so that they began to sink. But when Simon Peter saw it, he fell down at Jesus' knees, saying, Depart from me, for I am a sinful man, O Lord. For he and all who were with him were astonished at the catch of fish that they had taken. And so also were James and John, sons of Zebedee, who were partners with Simon. And Jesus said to Simon, Do not be afraid. From now on, you will be catching men." And when they had brought their boats to land, they left everything and followed him. So this is part one, looking at the choice to be obedient. And I just want to draw your attention to Peter's response to Jesus. Before I do that, I just want to a little bit of context of this passage. This is right at the beginning of Jesus' ministry. So he doesn't have his 12 disciples following him around in his ministry yet. Simon Peter, James and John, who were out fishing, didn't really know who Jesus was. But it wasn't the first time that they had met him. So prior to this, Jesus has already healed Peter's mother-in-law. Prior to this, they've seen other miracles and they've heard his teaching. So they do know something of who Jesus is. And you see that in Peter's response as he addresses him as Master. There's an element of respect for Jesus. He's let him go out on his boat and preach to everyone, and he's sat and he's listened to him. So he does know something, but he doesn't fully know who Jesus is at this moment. Not yet, anyway. I'm just going to read Peter's response. Simon, I'm going to call him Peter, but Simon, it's Peter, it's Simon Peter. I'm just going to read his response again. It says this: "Master, we toiled all night and took nothing, but at your word, I will let down the nets." These men had been fishing all night and seen no fish at all. They had actually completely given up. They were washing their nets at the beginning of this passage. They were not planning on going back into the water and fishing again. They were washing their nets ready for the next night that they had planned to go fishing. They'd completely given up. And Peter points this out to Jesus. "We've been toiling all night." I wonder if you have got a version of toiling all night. Some years ago, there was a time and I'd suffered two kind of quite major disappointments in a really short space of time. And I remember going to a worship meeting and we were singing these songs and I couldn't sing them. I just couldn't get the words out. I was finding it so difficult to sing these truths about God, about his promises. "Blessed be your name" was one of them. And I just couldn't do it because I was so heartbroken and so disappointed and low at that time. And I remember going and sharing this with a friend. And she took me aside, she made me a hot chocolate, sat me down, and she asked me some questions. She said, "Anna, do your circumstances and how you're feeling mean that Jesus is not faithful?" "No." She said, "Does it mean that God's promises over you are no longer true?" "No." She said, "Does it mean that God is not good?" "No." And that really, really helped me and encouraged me. And it helped me to make the choice to stand on those things that I knew were true in my head, even though I was not feeling it in my heart. And Peter kind of does that here too. He does not feel necessarily like going back and fishing. He's saying, look, we've done this all night, but he makes the choice. And we know that he's not expecting what he gets because later on we've read that he was astonished at the catch of fish. He was surprised. He didn't expect that that was going to happen, but he just stepped out in what Jesus was saying on his small knowledge of who Jesus was. And he made that choice to be obedient. Now, Peter got an instant response. He got all these fish. I didn't get that when I made that choice. But gradually, over time, I started to see God's faithfulness in the situation, started to see his hand on my life, and he brought me through that. And I feel like there's just encouragement for anyone this morning who might feel that they are in the middle of fishing all night and getting no fish. Again, we talked earlier, it might be that God has asked you to do something and you just don't feel like it, or it might be that you're just in a place where life is tough at the moment. It is hard work, and all these things are expected, and it's hard to make that choice. And I feel like there's encouragement for you this morning that God is faithful, he is good, his promises are still true, and if we step out on those things and choose to be obedient, choose to walk with him, we will see the fruit of that, whether it be instant like Peter, whether it be gradually like me, but he will not disappoint and let down. And I love it that today we've been talking about what the future holds for us, the ultimate future. We're not going to be let down, are we? No matter what we go through, we know where we're going. We're not going to be let down. We have a friend in Jesus, and he has an ultimate promise for us, which is just absolutely awesome. Just want to have a quick look at the end of this passage at the results of Peter's obedience. I'm going to read the last verses again. When Simon Peter saw it, he fell down at Jesus' knees, saying, "Depart from me, for I'm a sinful man, O Lord." I'll go back a bit. They came and filled both the boats so that they began to sink. But when Simon Peter saw it, he fell down at Jesus' knees, saying, "Depart from me, for I'm a sinful man, O Lord." For he and all who were with him were astonished at the catch of fish they had taken, and so were James and John, sons of Zebedee, who were partners. And Jesus said to Simon, "Do not be afraid, from now on you will be catching men." And when they had brought their boats to land, they left everything and followed him. The results of Peter's obedience to Jesus was that he fell into a greater relationship with Jesus. He goes from calling him master to calling him Lord. He understands more of who Jesus is through him being obedient and seeing the result of that obedience. He gets it. He appropriately bows down at Jesus' feet. He understands what's going on here and something more. He doesn't fully know yet who Jesus is, but this is the start of a journey that he takes with Jesus, getting to know him more and more. And it also prepares him, that first act of obedience in putting those nets back out, prepares him for the second thing that Jesus calls him to, which is to follow him. Peter, along with James and John, leave everything and follow Jesus. So we've got first act of obedience, reveals something of more who Jesus is, which then prepares his heart for the next thing that Jesus calls him to do. And he calls him into this deep, greater friendship and relationship with him. And if you know the rest of Peter's story, you'll know that he follows Jesus for the next 3 years, having given up everything. He doesn't always get it right, and neither do we. But he follows him, he learns from him, he does the things that Jesus does, and he walks with him and develops this amazing, amazing friendship. That is the result of his obedience. And I really felt and feel this morning that God wants to remind us of that. Because I don't know about you, but the things that I associate with obedience are authority, dread, don't want to do that, a loss of freedom. I've got to do what you've got to say, what you say, not what I say. I don't associate it with friendship. Yet when you do associate with friendship, it changes everything. I want us to turn to John 21. This is 3 years later. So Peter has been walking with Jesus for 3 years. Jesus has died and he's risen again, and he starts appearing to his disciples. Over those 3 years, Peter, James and John, the other disciples, have grown in deep friendship. They've lived together, they've laughed together, they've grieved together, they've seen miracles together. They've grown in a deep friendship. And Jesus appears to them in this passage again. Let's read it. So it's 21 verses 1 down to 8. After this, Jesus revealed himself again to the disciples by the Sea of Tiberias. And he revealed himself in this way. Simon Peter, Thomas, called the twin, Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and 2 others of his disciples were together. Simon Peter said to them, "I'm going fishing." They said to him, "We'll go with you." They went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. Sounds familiar. Just as day was breaking, Jesus stood on the shore, yet the disciples did not know that it was Jesus. Jesus said to them, "Children, do you have any fish?" They answered him, "No." And he said to them, "Cast the net on the right side of the boat, and you will find some." So they cast it. And now they were not able to haul it in because of the quantity of fish. The disciple whom Jesus loved, we think John, who wrote this book, therefore said to Peter, "It is the Lord." When Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put on his outer garment, for he was stripped for work, and threw himself into the sea. The other disciples came in the boat, dragging the net full of fish, for they were not far from the land, but about 100 yards off. I love it that Jesus chose to perform the exact same miracle to these disciples. He could have revealed himself to the disciples in any way that he wanted to, but he chose to repeat a miracle. A moment that was hugely significant in the lives of those disciples, and a moment that was precious between Jesus and them. It was the moment that their friendship really first started. It was the moment that he called them to follow him, and they did. He chose to repeat something of that moment to them. There's something so intimate in that, isn't there? I don't know if you've ever had it where you've had a moment with God and you've been reminded of it years later, or someone has spoken a word over you, you've had a picture and then you get it again years later. There's something so intimate in that. There's something about real friendship there. And there's a real sense of that here as well. Just the fact that Jesus does that same thing, it would have reminded them of that moment. It would have reminded them that Jesus says, now you're going to go and catch men, of that commission that then they go on to do. And I just think there's something really beautiful there. That same trip to Ibiza that I went on when I was 16, it was about, I'd not been abroad much before. I'd only ever been to a city in Germany before then. And I'd never seen a place like it before. It was beautiful. The views and the scenery and the lizards. I was particularly struck by the lizards. Nothing particularly amazing, but for me at the time, who'd never seen a lizard before, especially out in the wild, seeing them scurrying around everywhere, I was amazed by it. And on the last evening before we were due to fly home, I went up back onto the cliff and I looked out at the view and at creation, and I worshipped God. And I'm getting all teary. I don't know why, I didn't expect that. I am a crier. I stood there and I worshipped God at how beautiful what I could see was and his creation. And I hadn't seen a lizard for about 48 hours at this point. So after I'd been worshipping and praising God for this view, I closed my eyes and I said, quite flippantly, oh, and if you fancy showing me another lizard, I wouldn't mind that. Opened my eyes and this lizard ran out from behind a rock. And I saw this lizard and I was amazed. There was an intimate moment there between me and God. And what there was this contrast of me being in awe of Jesus, creator, king of the universe, and then me knowing him as friend. That lizard I don't think, has affected my life much. He didn't have to do that. It wasn't a breakthrough moment. It was just a precious little gift between God and me. And that's who God is. He wants to be our friend. And again, in this passage, I think we see that with Peter. Just want to read when Peter realizes it's Jesus. Oh, isn't it also lovely that they get that it's Jesus as soon as the fish come in? It shows that they're remembering, it's Jesus. What Peter does, when he heard it was the Lord, he put on his outer garment, for he was stripped for work, and threw himself into the sea. Now, I've heard it preached before in quite a funny way. What's he putting his coat on for, to jump into the sea? Most people take their coats off to jump into the sea. But I read something this week that made me think. And it was almost as if Peter felt, I am not dressed to be in the presence of the Lord right now. I'm in my fisherman's whatever. I'm not dressed appropriately. I need to dress appropriately. This is the Lord. And yet, the Lord is his friend to the point that he jumps in the sea because there's a sense of urgency. I want to see my friend. I love him and I want to be with him. And he throws himself towards Jesus. There's this beautiful parallel of the awe of the king and yet friendship with him. And I don't see that in many other places. I've tried to search for some sort of illustration, I'm sure there is one, or story of it, but I can't see it in many places because often in relationships that involve authority that we know, it ends up that we're actually discouraged from being close friends with those people. In my workplace, when I'm working with young people, there's an authoritative relationship, or as a teacher, that's the same thing. You have to have boundaries in place. Appropriately, you have boundaries in place. But there are no boundaries when it comes to friendship with Jesus, even though he is the king of the world. And it's just amazing. I want to look at one final passage to finish. And it's also in John, and it's John 15. And it's from verse 12 down to 17, and it says this. This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, that someone lay down his life for his friends. You are my friends if you do what I command you. There's that thing of friendship and obedience coming together. No longer do I call you servants, for the servant does not know what his master is doing, but I have called you friends. For all that I have heard from my Father I have made known to you. You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you that you should go and bear fruit, and that your fruit should abide, so that whatever you ask the Father in my name, he may give it to you. These things I command, so that you will love one another. I feel like there's a tying together in that passage. This is Jesus speaking to his disciples, but it's Jesus speaking to us. To anyone who follows his command, he is calling friends. And it's not that relationship of a boss and what do you call somebody who's an employee or a teacher and a student. It's not that kind of relationship, because Jesus wants to reveal to us everything the Father is doing. There's intimacy there because Jesus has laid his life down for us in order for us to be in a friendship with us. Yes, he wants us to be obedient. Yes, he wants us to follow his commands, but it changes everything when we know that the King of the universe, who's calling us into obedience, is also our close and intimate Father and friend. It means he's got our back. I'm going to close there. I feel like there's three areas of response to this. And there's probably others. Every time this happens to me and someone says this, I've got something else I want to respond to. But there's three things that I want to pull out. One is this whole idea of if you feel that you are fishing and not getting any fish. If you're in the middle of that, of whatever that might be for you, that God just wants to encourage you to keep going and keep trusting in him and step out in faith, in obedience, even if you don't feel it. Because he does want to show you his faithfulness, and he is friends with you as well. I feel the other thing is just to be reminded of his friendship. I think sometimes we can fall into that trap of God, King of the universe. Oh yes, I've got to obey, and forget this is my friend who I can have intimate moments with, and he wants to give us those things. And the third thing is just to point out that in these passages, when Jesus speaks to his disciples and asks them to lower the net, they don't know who he is. In the first passage, he's just master, he's not Lord yet. They don't fully know him. And in the second passage, that he's just some distant stranger on the beach, giving them an idea of where to go fishing. They don't know it's Jesus. And I just feel like if there's anybody here who doesn't know Jesus as Lord or Saviour yet, you can still step out in obedience, and there's something for you too. For whatever little knowledge it is that you have of Jesus, it's enough to step out and give it a go and put what he says to the test. It's enough. It was enough for them, and it brought them into a deeper relationship with him. So if you're here today and you don't necessarily feel that Jesus is your friend, but you know that he's stirring something in you, I want to encourage you to respond to that, because it can bring you into a deeper relationship and a greater knowledge of who he is too. I'm going to finish there.